Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vietor.
On the pod today, our interview with Senator Brian Schatz, who stopped by Cricket HQ on Friday and joined us for some listener Q&A with What a Day's Priyanka Aribindi. We talk about impeachment, we talk about the Senate, and a lot of other issues in the news right now.
Boy, did we have some cues for his A, you know?
Okay. But before we get to that, we're going to start by talking about 2020 and how Joe Biden's frontrunner status is affecting the primary race. Also, some housekeeping. A new episode of Love It or Leave It dropped over the weekend.
We had our Texas tour has come to a fitting conclusion. I don't know. But we had a great time in Dallas. We had a great time in Austin. The Dallas show is out right now. I spoke to Julian Castro, presidential candidate, Texas native. He played Queen for a day. The latest candidate to face the gauntlet. We had Emily Heller Colin Allred, member of Congress from Texas, and Christian Hernandez, who is an activist with DSA in Texas. So it was a really great show.
On the latest Hysteria, Aaron Ryan and Alyssa Mastromonaco talk about the frightening fetal heartbeat bill just signed into law by Georgia's governor. And check out our latest candidate bonus episode, where Tommy talked with California Congressman Eric Swalwell. Finally, we are on the road this week in Brooklyn and Washington, D.C. Instead of a Thursday pod, we'll be releasing the Brooklyn show on Friday morning, and you'll hear the D.C. show on Monday. All right, before we get to our conversation with Brian Schatz, let's talk about the Democratic primary.
Okay.
Since Joe Biden entered the race a little more than 2 weeks ago, he has only increased his polling lead. The average national polls show he's got a 27-point lead over Bernie Sanders, the next closest candidate. He's about 13 points ahead in New Hampshire, and a new poll out this weekend showed him up more than 30 points in South Carolina. Two big caveats here. One, we have 9 months until the first votes are cast. We haven't even had the first debate, and if we all recall, Donald Trump did not even enter the race until June in 2015. Second big caveat, Biden's lead in Iowa, where many of the other candidates have spent a lot of time, is an average of only 4 points. Guys, some pundits predicted that Biden's best day in this race would be the day before he entered. That has not come true. What do you think explains his current strength as a candidate at this moment in time? Because like we like to say over and over, it's only a snapshot in time.
That's our classic phrase. It's only a snapshot in time. That's
not predictive.
That's why
it's just a snapshot.
I would say the one thing, just before we even get into what it means, like I have to say, I was genuinely surprised. Like when I didn't foresee that when Biden got into the race, there would be this big poll jump. In my mind, as a political, as somebody paying attention, let me say this again. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I just didn't expect him to have this huge bump, right? I just thought his popularity was sort of baked into the polling price, and that his getting in wouldn't have this big shift in the national poll. So that just to me was interesting and surprising, because the one thing is like, okay, is this somebody who just has the most name ID? Is this somebody who just everybody is kind of behind until they find somebody that they're more interested in? But that doesn't explain people choosing him right when he gets in, for him going from whatever mid-20s to mid-30s or higher.
Yeah. What do you think, Tommy?
I think part of it is probably the fact that he is basically a celebrity. I think 2016 taught me a lot about how celebrity can overwhelm all the things we think we know about politics. Remember that guy Trump got elected, and Biden is the closest to that level of fame. I also think that electability is been his core argument, and it's something people are looking to hear. And because no one knows what electability means, you just have to say it a lot, and people will assume, therefore, you are electability. The question we all will be asking ourselves is, will this be 2016 where Trump shot ahead to a big lead early and just maintained it, or will this be like every other election before it, where people rose and fall throughout the race? I don't think we know that yet.
Yeah. I also think, Joe Biden spent 8 years as vice president to the most beloved Democrat in the entire party. Barack Obama has a 95% approval rating among Democrats. And when people see Biden, they think he's the guy that not only Obama picked, but he supported Obama's policies and Obama's presidency lockstep for 8 years. And most Democrats are very happy with Obama's presidency.
They're also very happy with the fact that he won twice.
That he won twice.
That's right.
And I think we also have learned, and we've said this before, most Democrats are not as ideological as you would assume from reading Twitter, which is why also you have like people who say Biden is their first choice. A lot of them say Bernie Sanders is their second choice, and vice versa. People who Bernie Sanders is their first choice, they say Joe Biden's their second choice. So that does not fit well with the wars that rage on Twitter every day.
Yeah, Biden has sort of defanged some of the loudest voices on Twitter, at least so far. I think a lot of people assumed that they would surface old quotes and votes and statements, and that would immediately hurt him among key constituencies. In fact, the opposite occurred. He got a 6-point some odd bounce from his announcement until today. So, all of this is likely to change when these questions are raised at debates or in paid advertisements or, routinely it stops in early states. But it is notable.
Yeah, but I do think, Tommy, too, what you said about celebrity is a very smart point. Like, people feel comfortable with Joe Biden because they know Joe Biden, and they don't really know. Here's the candidates they know right now. They know Joe Biden. His name recognition is like off the charts. Bernie Sanders' name recognition is approaching 100% as well. And then the next candidate that they know is Elizabeth Warren, because she's been in the national spotlight for a little bit too, though her name ID is not as high as Bernie or Biden, but it's up there. But beyond those three, most Democratic voters in the country are not very familiar with Kamala Harris or Cory Booker or Beto O'Rourke or Pete Buttigieg or all these other candidates. A lot of the people that we talk to are people who are active on Twitter, who are paid close attention to politics. Of course they know all these other candidates. And with a lot of those people who pay close attention, the race is actually closer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it's a little bit like right now we're at kind of a self-serve yogurt place, and like we know we like, plain tart, right? We like plain tart, maybe with some gaff chips in it. We know that that's something we've had before.
Hate the plain tart.
I love a plain tart.
It's my go-to.
But now we're like, you know what? This is our time. So we're trying a little gay mayor, trying a little Vermont socialist.
I was going to say cake, vanilla cake flavor.
We kind of stuffed our faces on Texas congressmen, and now we're not sure if we're just sick of it or actually if we truly love it, but we just haven't tried it in a cone yet. We're giving things a try.
Who are the little white cups here?
I guess caucuses? I don't know.
Sure. Fill them up.
I also think there's a difference in what kind of race it is. In 2008, for example, George W. Bush, no matter what happened, was going to be a distant memory. He was not going to win again. And so a lot of Democrats are open to, okay, what's next for the party? What's next? Let's experiment. Maybe we'll take a shot on this black guy named Barack Hussein Obama, who was a state senator before that. I think in this race, Democrats are, for good reason, scared to death of a second Trump presidency. And so I know we've been talking about electability, electability is hard to measure, but I think it does explain gravitating towards someone, at least initially, who you feel comfortable with.
If you're not totally sure you're going to be happy with some complicated cheesecake flavor, you just fill your container with vanilla and you walk out and you're like, it may not be the perfect thing, but I know I'll eat the whole cup of it.
Just cover it in cookie dough.
But also I do think that's like, I was thinking about, the polls about Hillary versus Obama in 2008. And one of the things that happened among black voters was there was a long period of time where Hillary was leading.
Oh, by a lot.
By a huge margin, very similar to what
voters.
Among black voters. And there was a kind of shift that happened when all of a sudden people got a real look at Barack Obama and they were like, this isn't just a fluke. This isn't a pie in the sky idea. Like, we believe in this person and we think he can win now. And once the idea of him winning became a real possibility, all of a sudden people got behind him. And I think I don't know what's going to play out in the polls, but to your point about how fearful people are, I think that I think it's actually an important moment to look at polling that shows white voters versus people of color, because right now, I think a fair argument for why Biden is leading is you see the people who feel most threatened by the Trump presidency and who were most worried about Trump winning before he won, saying, we want to go with the safe bet. Now, other candidates can make the same argument Barack Obama did and said, this electability argument isn't fair. I'm the electable one. I'm the one who can appeal to the people who Trump has lost. I'm the one who can appeal to the broadest base of this party. And by the way, I think one of the biggest challenges Biden is going to have is people who say, I'm the one who's going to appeal to young people who you need to knock on doors and get out there. But right now, I think there's a kind of, to your point, there's a kind of redoubt to safety because the stakes are so high.
Yeah, and also you notice, Harriet of CNN pointed this out, that non-college educated Democratic voters, white, black, and Latino, are more likely right now to be gravitating towards both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders because they are not paying as close attention to politics and the ups and downs of the news cycle. And Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are people who they know. Now, Lovett, what you said is, Obama's support among African Americans changed dramatically once he won Iowa.
Right. The key to winning South Carolina was winning Iowa,
which we always planned on in the campaign.
Case.
Why do you think so, Tommy? His Biden's lead in Iowa is only 4 points, and we actually haven't had an Iowa poll in a little bit, so it could either go up or down. But what makes you think it might be closer?
So Biden has never done well in Iowa. In 2008, Biden's Iowa numbers never went above 6%. He finished fifth. He didn't win a single county, so he performed very poorly in Iowa. He has no staff. He has no organization in the state. Other candidates have been there, half dozen times less. They've been a bunch of counties. I think that Iowa voters are likely to remain undecided for a longer period of time, too. So there's not going to be as many low information voters who are like, yeah, I'm for Biden now. I think they're going to say, I don't know. But, the interesting thing to watch in Iowa is the number of people who say a given candidate's their second choice as well as their first choice, because in a field this big, the way caucus math works is you have to meet a certain threshold to be viable and to be eligible to get delegates. And people below that threshold, if you're supporting a candidate that isn't viable, you can then go to your second choice. And so it's something to watch, and it's also part of the tactical considerations when you decide whether to take a shot at the front runner or not.
Yeah, and I think the fact that more candidates have spent more time in the state of Iowa than any other state shows that when voters get to know people more, get to know some of these candidates, they might think, okay, well, I started off knowing Joe Biden, knowing Bernie Sanders, but I've been seeing Elizabeth Warren a lot, and I really like her. I've been seeing Kamala Harris, and I like her. I like Pete Buttigieg. So I think that's one dynamic at play. How does his frontrunner status change the dynamics of the race, of the primary race? The fact that he has right now a commanding lead. What do you think that does to the other candidates' strategies?
I think it helps out Bernie for a while. I think you're a lot less worried about having people take shots at you if you're sitting in second place than you're sitting at first.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually think it might hurt Bernie in this crowded field because I think Bernie's bet is, okay, he's got near universal name recognition and he's polling at about 20% in a lot of these states. And you think, oh, that's not that high. But in a crowded field, 20% could be enough. But that's only if the rest of the vote is spread out fairly evenly among all of the other candidates. To the extent that Biden is taking support away from Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, Pete Buttigieg, and the rest of them, if Biden's support gets too high, then Bernie's 20% isn't going to get him.
Yeah, but that's assuming a static race from now through the caucuses. I'm saying that in the near term, if you're ahead, you're likely to get shot at, and if you're in second or third place, you are not. I think that's beneficial. I would bet that the dynamic in this race is going to change somewhat over time, and so I would like to not be the front runner right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm just thinking like what are the kind of ideological implications for what we're seeing, right? Because you have Joe Biden, who I think represents whatever. You have Joe Biden who represents Obama politics, right? And in some sense, I expect to see him in some places give to the kind of the moment and shift to the left to kind of recognize where the base of the party is, while at others trying to articulate a message about appealing to people in moderation, right? Which will drive some people crazy. Then you have Bernie and Elizabeth Warren staking out this more kind of structural critique of of not just the Democratic Party, but of the economy and American politics. And then you have, I think, a mishmash of other candidates who are, in some sense, doing what Biden is doing while trying to more appeal to the Bernie and Warren wing of the party. And so the Bernie really was rewarded in 2016 by a clean ideological debate, right? Hillary Clinton represents the establishment. I represent a left change movement. And now I don't know who Bernie's arguing against exactly. In some ways he's won. In some ways with Biden he's not winning. It just puts him in a tough position, and it makes the ideological debate harder to find. Now, to your point, it's not as important to Democratic voters, but it is important to me.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we've said this before at the beginning, right? Which is the big question in 2016 was Bernie's vote a pro-Bernie? How much of Bernie's vote was a pro-Bernie vote, and how much of it was an anti-Hillary vote in the Democratic Party? And if it was
Do some quick math.
if it was very pro-Bernie, then he's in a strong position. But if there were a cohort of voters who decided to vote for Bernie Sanders because they did not like Hillary Clinton, and now that they have a bunch of other choices of candidates who, like, namely Elizabeth Warren, who have similar policies to Bernie, or some of these other candidates who said, yeah, Bernie was right. I'm for $15 minimum wage. I'm for Medicare for all. And then you have this choice. Then it becomes a little trickier for Bernie.
There was a great moment. Bernie had an interview, and they asked him, in 2016, you represented what a lot of people considered the fringe views of the Democratic Party. Now, all these years, now just 4 years later, you have all these candidates kind of adopting your worldview. Doesn't that mean you don't necessarily need to be in this race? And he goes, excuse me, I can't do it. You can do it, Tommy. You do a great voice, but why are they in the race? And I think that's sort of the sticking point for him. How much of the vote was anti-Hillary versus pro-Bernie, or how much of the vote was anti-Hillary versus pro-Bernie politics? And now Bernie politics are divided amongst 6 or 7 candidates, mostly amongst 2, but also trickling down through the rest.
Tommy, you said something that I totally agree with, which is, you don't want to be, it's dangerous to be the front runner this early because people start taking shots at you. The question for the field is who takes shots at Biden, right? Because you also know that in Iowa, if Bernie decides that his role in Iowa is going to be to start taking shots at Joe Biden, Iowans don't usually like that.
That's the risk. There's a real, I'm not going to say that many reals. That's the risk. There's a real risk to being seen as negative in Iowa. Iowa caucus goers notoriously, historically, do not like negative politics before January, whatever the caucus is, February 3rd this year, I think.
Yeah.
There might be a prisoner's dilemma, just like we saw in 2016, where everyone's like, who's going to attack Trump first? Could be Biden. Who's going to attack Biden first? That said, Elizabeth Warren took a pretty tough shot at Biden early on about donations from lobbyists. You could see them starting to mix it up on climate policy over the weekend. So, it seems like they're itching to have a substantive debate about policy that could veer negative.
Is that a tragedy of? Is that a prisoner's dilemma, or is that a tragedy of the commons?
Okay.
I leave it to the internet to decide.
Let's talk about how some of Biden's opponents are handling this. I do think, one more point about Bernie's first comments about Biden that could be construed as a contrast, right? Where I don't want to talk too much about Joe Biden. Joe Biden's a friend of mine, but he voted for NAFTA. I voted for against it. He voted for the Iraq War. I voted against it. I think that's, by the way,
totally
completely
legit.
fair.
Yeah.
Completely fair and legit. Let's talk about how some of the other opponents are talking about him. Last week, Reuters reported that the vice president will be releasing a climate change policy that might not be as ambitious as the Green New Deal. One of his advisors, Heather Zeichel, who we all know and worked with in the Obama administration, said, quote, "I respect where the activists are coming from. What we learned from the Obama administration is unless we find middle ground on these issues, we risk not having any policies." Now, no details of the plan have been released yet. And the Biden campaign says that Reuters mischaracterized its policy. But in response to the story, Bernie Sanders said, quote, "There is no middle ground on climate policy." AOC called the middle ground comment, quote, "a deal breaker." And the Sunrise Movement said that Biden's middle ground policy is, quote, "a death sentence for our generation."
Huh. That seems...
What did you think of the back and forth there, guys?
I think we can wait till we see it to have an opinion. And by the way, maybe the critics are right. I'm totally open to that.
Perhaps.
And I am also very, I think Heather Zeichel is incredibly smart and incredibly...
And an activist.
And an activist.
She has been forever.
And she knows this issue better than anyone. I just want to see the plan. I don't know. I don't know how we can all reach such stark conclusions without having seen it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my reaction to the plan depends on what we think it is. So with the caveat, again, that we haven't read the plan, but a so-called middle ground climate change policy probably won't deal with the magnitude of the problem, and I would not love that. And I also don't think that Democrats have made any progress on climate change policy over the many years we've been talking about it by trimming our sails in advance in the hopes that Republicans will meet us halfway. We make progress by winning elections and then doing things. Now, if it's a political strategy, I think the jury is still out. I mean, if Biden thinks that this is the best framing and the best way to talk about climate to win an election, then they have to prove it. But the one thing, again, that we know for sure is that the way you get action on climate policy is by voting for Democrats. It's a binary choice. Republicans will do nothing, if not make it worse. Democrats will do something. So we'll see. I mean, the best thing the Green New Deal proponents did is they've completely changed the left flank of the debate. And they've also forced every Democrat to say, this is the first thing you will do when you get into office. I don't think that was true with Obama. We did healthcare first. So I think they've really shifted the way we prioritize climate.
Well, one of the problems we had is we actually had a cap and trade vote right around the same time that healthcare was happening.
Right.
A bunch of Democrats in the House walked the plank basically by taking this vote and doing what they thought were right. And then the Senate just left them all fucking hanging there.
Yeah.
And because there was a lot of red state Democrats who wouldn't even go for a cap and trade program.
I know.
Which, for those who don't know, cap and trade is like, talk about Green New Deal. It is way less ambitious than the Green New Deal, okay? And so we couldn't get a bunch of red state Democrats to support that in the Senate. Democratic House members voted for it, and a lot of them lost their election. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was healthcare. Maybe it was just a bad economy. We can argue about that. But two questions on every Democratic policy in this primary. Is it big enough and ambitious enough to meet the magnitude of the challenge? And do you have a plan to get it done? And that can be non-ideological at times, right? Like, is Medicare for All ambitious enough to meet the challenge? Absolutely. Do you have a plan to get it done? Well, if you're not willing to get rid of the filibuster, no, you don't.
Well, and also, though, part of this, the ability to get something big done on climate, part of that may depend on staking out a claim further to the left than where you ultimately plan on being, because you want to have room to give to some of those moderate Democrats, right? So it's a little bit of a non sequitur to say we want to propose something more moderate because we want something that we can get done. Maybe part of what we're trying to do right now, especially in this primary, is stake out our vision, stake out the truest version, the most ambitious version of what we believe in. And then if we have to compromise just to get something done, that's politics. But I do think that part of the criticism coming at Biden, even before we see the plan, is not acceding to that mindset around Democrats, which is, I think, one of the things that the left flank of the party has shown to be effective. I mean, look, AOC talks about a high marginal tax rate, and then the whole country's talking about it for a few days, and lo and behold, it's popular amongst independents and moderates. Same thing with Elizabeth Warren and her wealth tax. You stake out this ambitious position, and then all of a sudden you've made it mainstream, and maybe you don't ultimately get there when the final votes are tallied, but you've actually given moderates a way to win, right? By saying, look, I made this more conservative. I made this more moderate.
So I agree with that. And I think there's a difference between the policies you propose, which I agree with you, Lovett, should be very ambitious because as we learned in the Obama administration, you end up giving a lot. And the politics you use to build support for it. And I, credit the Sunrise Movement for incredible activism and putting this on the national agenda. I think when you respond to a Reuters story that doesn't have the detailed plan with this is a death sentence, this would be a death sentence for our generation, you potentially turn off people that you need. Like, I think there is a way to, like, so Jay Inslee criticized this report as well. And he said, he praised the Obama-Biden administration on climate policy, but said, the times and science have changed. We simply cannot go back to the past. We need a bold climate plan for the future. I actually think if you're running against Biden, that's a fairly effective message. You start by recognizing that a lot of people in the Democratic Party, most people in the Democratic Party, like what Barack Obama and Joe Biden done. But you said, you know what? Times have changed. The situation has changed. We need something better.
And
we can't go back to that.
I like that Jay Inslee said it from a scooter.
That was...
I think that...
I do like that.
I do like the activist groups like the Sunrise Movement. I mean, their job is to criticize everything to the right of what they want.
That's
now,
right.
I don't know that accusing a politician of mass generational murder is the way to do it.
No, you do that after the white paper comes out.
Yeah. But I think the reality is what these guys run on climate policy is important, and it's important to try to build a movement for policies you think are going to be your key priorities when you get there. But what will happen when the next president walks into the Oval Office is you will figure out what is doable. You'll figure out what support there is. And we talk about the filibuster a lot. It's important. It doesn't fucking matter if we don't win the Senate.
Yeah.
We're a long way away from giving a shit about the filibuster. We need to win elections in some states where we don't have candidates yet.
Well, and that's exactly right. And that's another big problem because, like, let's remember Arizona in 2018. Kyrsten Sinema is the senator. She is pretty conservative for a senator. She is middle of the road centrist to, like she did not glom onto a lot of those positions, a lot of liberal positions. So we do have now a Democrat out of Arizona, but I bet she's not going to be on board with a big, ambitious Green New Deal, and we're going to have to figure out what that means, We should pressure her. We should pressure other people like this, but as we pressure people, we've got to make space for them to sort of come on board, right? Like, it has to be a mix of pressure and also like, okay, come on board now.
Because, part of this is, if we don't address this issue, it doesn't matter what ice cream we pick. It's going to melt.
That's exactly. Well, there's another good political argument for this from Julian Brave Noisecat, who's the director of Green New Deal strategy at Data for Progress, obviously a very lefty group. Mm-hmm. He said, quote, Biden appeals to white middle-class suburban voters, and that's great, but he's not doing so well among young people. We do have a policy out there designed to build a new climate coalition. It's called the Green New Deal, and he needs to jump on board. He said, that's a very good argument.
I think that, to me, we can talk about where the polls are now, but obviously everything depends on what these candidates do in the next 9 months. And to me, what I am looking for, not just like as a Twitter pundit, but like as a person, is like I want to understand where the kind of old-fashioned folksiness of Biden that has come with, I think, some old-fashioned positions along the way meets the moment that we're in, and in a way that's not only good policy but also good politics. Because to their point, his great challenge is going to be to appeal to young people, and it's not going to be with memes. Luckily, I don't think they think that. It's going to be with policy, and to me, it's about college, it's about healthcare, and it's about climate, and among other things. So yeah. I think that, to me, is actually a really good sign for Biden, because sometimes candidates are presented with a problem. They don't know how to appeal to a group of people, and they don't have a way to do it. There's a clear path for Joe Biden to maybe cement this nomination by adopting some pretty good policy.
Yeah, what I want to know from Joe Biden is, does he recognize how politics and power relations and partisanship has shifted over the years that he's been in politics, even since he's been in the Obama administration? Because if he believes that backslapping Mitch McConnell is the way to change this country and get progressive policies passed, I think he's sorely mistaken, and I worry about that. I want to see candidates, and this is about whether they can win and whether they'll be good presidents. It's both an electability and a president thing. Like, do you not only just have a plan to get things done, to change things, but do you have a way to get that plan passed? And so,
and it better not include like Settlers of Catan with fucking Tom Cotton.
That's exactly right. Like you said, Tommy, if we don't get the Senate back, and we're not even thinking about the filibuster because we didn't even make the Senate, now what are you going to do? Okay, because the Republicans probably still aren't going to compromise with you. So do you have executive actions ready? Do you have other things that you can do ready? Are you going to focus on foreign policy? You know what I'm saying? Like, how are you going to staff your administration? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things you can do to figure out a strategy to get your plan passed. And I want to see that Biden, and if I was Biden's opponents, that's sort of where I would go. Like, have you recognized and understood how politics has changed in this era?
And so far, time will tell.
So one person who's taking Biden quite seriously is Donald Trump. He said in an interview with Politico on Friday that Biden is a frontrunner and that the other candidates in the primary, quote, aren't registering with the public. Meanwhile, Trump's TV attorney, Rudy Giuliani, was planning on going to Ukraine in order to persuade that foreign government to move forward with bullshit investigations into the origins of the Mueller investigation, as well as business dealings between Joe Biden's son and a Ukrainian oil company. He ultimately canceled that trip after the New York Times reported it, but Trump told Politico he thinks it'd be appropriate for him to talk to his own attorney general about opening an investigation into either Biden or his son, and Giuliani said it's fine for Trump's team to meddle in a foreign investigation. What does this tell us about what we can expect from Trump in 2020, and how do Democrats handle this shit?
I mean, they're just going to run the dirtiest race they can possibly run.
Including using all of the levers of power that they have available.
Including things that would normally be seen as beyond the pale, like flying to another country to try to urge their law enforcement to reopen an investigation because it might damage someone you're running against, and then bragging about it to the New York Times. That was the craziest article I've ever read in my life. I do sincerely wonder how many martinis Rudy Giuliani had before he took that call from the New York Times, because it was batshit crazy, and he canceled the trip.
I do like the idea of Rudy Giuliani traveling around the world trying to make trouble, because I do believe it will be ineffective on the whole. Yeah, I mean,
Much like the Stephen Miller hair dye he used on his Fox appearance over the weekend.
I didn't see it.
Oh, man.
That's going to be a treat for me after we finish recording.
The before and after, there's Rudy with all of his very few gray hairs, and then the next scene, there's Rudy with just jet black hair.
Look, here's the thing. Rudy is genuinely going through something, and he's doing it in front of all of us. And actually, one of the things that happens when you have someone like Trump in office is that because he's such a primitive kind of creature in his habits, he attracts people who are really kind of tapping. We don't have a lot of frontal lobe decision making going on right now, so you get a lot of real base shit, and it plays out on television. But one other part of this is, it is incredibly nefarious. It is incredibly dangerous. This idea of investigating your opponents, but it's worth remembering why this is happening, and one of the base level risks of Donald Trump from the very beginning. When you have someone who is so fundamentally corrupt, someone with so many foreign entanglements, someone with so many illicit dealings over the years, one of the only strategies they can take to win is to try to make the other person look just as dirty, whether it's true or not, whether you're latching on to sort of corruptish behavior, as we've seen in the past, or just trying to invent something out of whole cloth. And so because Donald Trump is so corrupt, the only way he can win is by making the other person look so corrupt, and that requires doing things that further corrupt the institutions of our country. And again, it comes back to the Republicans, who have forgiven so much along the way to make someone this low require so much additional viciousness in order to win.
I also believe that one of the reasons they're starting this now during the primary is because they know we have a potentially divisive primary on our hands among Democrats. And so if you're one of Joe Biden's opponents and you're looking at Giuliani and Trump opening up investigations into Biden and thinking, maybe this is going to be good for me, I think every Democrat should stand up and condemn this kind of shit, because it's Joe Biden today, it'll be you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. He's going to do this if you think that Hillary Clinton, like we've said this before, she had a long history and a lot of baggage that she had to deal with in this race. But don't think for a second that Donald Trump and all of his goons and a giant conservative media apparatus can paint any Democratic candidate as a corrupt, awful asshole, because they will do it to every single one of them. And so that when stories like this come out, every Democrat should stand up and say that is fucked up.
First, they came for Joe Biden,
right?
But I did not speak up because I was at 3% in Iowa. But no, it's right, because I think part of the challenge we had in 2016 is they used the foundation and made shit up, but then also used little bits of truth to generate incredibly explosive and unfair stories, whether it was emails or double dipping by members of her team and what have you. And but then again, you go look at that Uranium One story, and it is basically fabricated out of whole cloth, and they will still
much
run
like
with
this
it.
Ukraine story.
Benghazi turned into a multi-year fiasco, political fiasco, because it was expedient and for no other reason. So,
and reporters are going to play along. By the way,
we are going to see
They are not our friends. They are not on our team. They are trying to take people down left and right because they see themselves as holding people in power accountable regardless of party. So we should not expect reporters to be the ones who stand up and say, no, this is wrong. So
I think it's, how much of 2020 is going to look exactly like 2016? And let's just hope it's just enough that we win.
And that is
right.
Something to be hopeful about. Okay. When we come back, we will have someone who is quite hopeful about the state of politics, Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii. Shots for joining us today, and What did we think of Game of Thrones
Hold
last
on.
night? Love it as a pin tweet.
Give him
on.
give him your spoiler buffer.
Spoiler buffer. This is a spoiler buffer. You're driving, turn the volume down. If you're on a bird scooter, pull over. You're hitting pause.
That means you, Jay Inslee.
Yeah, Jay Inslee, take your AirPods out while you're scooting around.
All right, you ready? Shut it off. Shut it off. Shut it off.
Thrones.
I'm sad.
Loved it.
Unbelievable. Look, I loved Game of Thrones from the very beginning. In fact, I remember a time where sitting on my couch at 13 Bro 9 and turning to my friend Jon Favreau and saying, "Hey, I got something I think you should watch." And he's like, "What's this shit?" Fuck you. But I got him to watch it.
And you know how? He said, it's all about the map. Let me just show you a map. And I said, that's how you're going to get me to watch it? And it worked.
It did work. You know, what can be said that hasn't already been said online? I would direct you to my Twitter to understand where I'm coming from. I just believe they didn't have the time. And it makes me, I have no joy in saying this. They didn't have the time to tell the story they needed to tell. And I just think that's a bummer. It's a bummer.
Tommy, you have thoughts?
I think it's a TV show,
No.
and that everyone needs to calm the fuck down.
I don't want to calm down.
And
yeah,
I
take it
enjoyed
seriously.
last night. I enjoyed watching Khaleesi's pretty, obvious, likely transition to a psychopath. Seeing the dragon mow down all kinds of innocent civilians, it got a little tiresome. I didn't need to see the third burned child's charred body on the ground, but it was in service of a broader point, I think, about power corrupting absolutely.
Yes.
I don't know. It was a fun episode.
I don't know how much more we needed about Daenerys' turn that hadn't already been there. From the day she arrived at Westeros, she had wanted to there's episode 2 of season 7. She gets to Dragonstone and she says, and she's looking at the board and she's got the 3 dragons and she goes to Tyrion, if my brother was here and he had 3 dragons, he would just be going after King's Landing right now. He would just be burning it right now. And Tyrion says, you don't want to be Queen of the Ashes. He says it first. And then she looks at him and she goes, okay. And so the next time that she's meeting with Lady Olenna and Ilaria Sand and all the rest of them, and they're plotting everything, and they say, burn King's Landing to the ground. And Tyrion says, what do you mean burn it to the ground? Tens of thousands of people will die. All these innocent people will die. And Ilaria Sand says, it's war, that happens all the time. And Lady Olenna looks at Daenerys and she said, listen, she's like, these people are like sheep, these lords, these people of Westeros, they only respond to fear. You are a dragon, act like a dragon. And Daenerys looks at her and is sort of like, you can tell she's like, well, I like that advice. But she had just been listening to Tyrion, so she's like, no, I don't want to be Queen of the Ashes. So she listens to Tyrion. She does what he says. Tyrion has stupid plans, causes her to lose 2 dragons, causes her to go north for some fucking, I'm gonna capture a white to show Cersei. It's all about negotiating with Cersei. And finally, Daenerys is like, what has trying to negotiate with this woman got me?
I mean, the hole in this explanation is she could have flown her ass over to the tower and torched Cersei and been done with it and not killed literally every person.
This is the problem.
Right, but
everything
I
you
think
just
she
said
was like,
true.
I want to send a fucking message. These people will only like me if they fear me because otherwise they love Jon Snow and they're about to know that Jon Snow is the true heir to the throne.
No,
she
look.
kills
Everybody
Cersei.
knows that if the person who's not true to the throne murders everybody in the city, that's how you get them on your side.
That's a tyrant. That's what a tyrant does.
Look,
fear.
This is the problem. Everything you're saying is true. The broad strokes of her transition are all there. The problem is, I don't think they did the work to set it up in that moment. If you
what would we have needed? Do you think?
I don't understand why. After all these years, we've built up these 2 characters: Cersei, the supervillain of the show; Daenerys, who is a merciless, ruthless person who, after one child dies, locks up her dragons for a year. Right, someone who contains both good and bad. They set this up for years and years and years. We have 2 episodes of conversation. We have a massive battle. We have last week's episode that I don't know what it did, and then we have this confrontation. Cersei's basically watching the episode with us. She's sitting on her couch, turning on HBO Go to see what happens to King's Landing. She has absolutely nothing to do. And then Daenerys wins not challenged by Cersei, not pushed to be evil, not taken to her extreme. She wins. The bells are ringing, and then looking up at the Red Keep. By the way, set up for episodes of a place where Cersei has surrounded herself with human shields, a place where if Daenerys really wanted to do what you're saying, prove that she's ruthless and instill fear, could have gone right to the Red Keep, killed everyone around Cersei, and killed Cersei, which still would have resulted in this debate, or well, I guess this undoing we're about to see of this person who was too ruthless to be supported by someone like Jon. But instead, she looks up at the Red Keep after the battle is won, and then she kills everybody. And I just don't buy it.
How many times has Cersei tricked her? How many times has Cersei played? Like, she, you know, for all Daenerys knew, going right to the Red Keep is exactly what Cersei wanted to do.
But
she
all
was
of this...
I think at some point she was just like, fuck this shit. I have been so screwed by my advisors, by everyone else. I'm going to burn this place to the ground because that's how I know I can rule through fear.
And that is reading into her facial expressions a bunch of motivations and understandings mixed together that may in together make sense but aren't shown by the show. And I know it's not shown by the show because they had to do something which I've never seen a show do before, which is in the previously on. In the final moments before the episode begins, they show you a scene from last week in which we see
all the voices. That was
they
cool.
added voices from years and years of the show, and I believe something that hasn't happened yet. Maybe I'm not totally sure. They added voices behind her to make the argument for what we're about to see because they knew they hadn't successfully done it through the actual episodes. They invented a scene.
They knew everyone wouldn't fucking remember everything because people's memories are like fucking 2 days
They
old.
gave her a motivation. They put a motivation behind her eyes, which we had not seen before, and they just.
It was there. Fire and blood is her fucking
I think
family. Her family motto is fire and
another episode, and they could have done it.
Made her. I don't agree with either of you guys. I just think they made her look like she turned crazy. And the whole flip of the coin, all the family, like you're either crazy or not, it's 50-50. They made her look insane in those moments. And then she heard the bells and she went nuts.
But this is the point, right?
See,
like, we don't know. We don't know because it's not set up.
Political calculation.
But like, I guess it's all like, to your point, Lovett, Jon thinks what he thinks, I think what I think. Neither is grounded in anything that we learn from the show. It's all just
and this is
an instinct.
Totally. And like this is my problem because I just think they could have look, I understand not wanting to be in Iceland and making more episodes, and I understand being done with the show, but to me what I'm seeing is basically characters. In part, I don't even blame them. In part, I blame the fact that we're outside of the books that maybe never will be wrapped up because it was too sweeping, too big, too broad. I mean, George R.R. Martin is like, see you next Christmas, 8 Christmases ago.
I think it is unfair to say that this is all about them wanting to finish early. We don't know. Like Tommy just said, it's sort of whatever you read into it. Like that, like good storytelling does that sometimes. Who knows? We could be right. Maybe they just wanted to finish, but like this could be exactly how they wanted to finish the series.
Think there's like these characters are being rushed around the map.
Well, there's plenty
they're flying around.
There's so many silly devices for sure.
Finally, the confrontation between Euron and Jaime we've all been dying to see since he washed up on the shore by coincidence 5 seconds earlier.
That one really didn't make any sense.
I would have
why are they fighting?
Well, to your point, I would have liked one more scene of Cersei being evil or doing something. I would have liked like one more scene of Cersei for sure.
She literally scoots by the Hound. She is so extraneous to her own undoing that she's like, this is what Dan said last night. He's like, if you'll excuse me, I just want to get by. I'm trying to beat the rush. Scoot.
I would have loved to have seen the Hound just bust out a sword and hack her head off. It is so out of character that he would wait and let Arya take care of it or whatever the thinking was.
Arya, years and years, she gets within 100 yards of her final mission, and she's like,
"Oh, I think that was totally within her character. I think it was totally earned what Arya did.
I actually agree. I agree it was earned. I take back what I said.
So, I'll give you Jaime and Euron meeting. What are you doing on this beach? I'll give you them meeting. I'll give you Cersei walking by the Hound for sure.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to try to get by. But sorry, you guys look like you guys. I don't want to get in the way of a brother conversation. I feel kind of out of place.
I'll give you that for sure. I'm all in though on the Daenerys thing. I think it was well done. But anyway, we'll see what happens when Samwell Tarly's on the Iron Throne.
The other thing too is I'm just not gonna have my hopes up anymore. I said this to Tommy earlier, but like
a random Dothraki guy is not gonna be
every time I think this final season has a trick up their sleeve, a dead dove falls out. So I am bummed. I'm just gonna admit it.
I loved it.
But I will tell you, my prediction for how the series ends right now, I still believe in.
Me too. Democracy reigns.
Yeah, John's got the happy ending.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very. I don't think it was pretty happy to get. Oh no, democracy reigns should not be taken as a happy ending. It should be taken as we had to endure years of mass slaughter to get to this point where we're sort of going to now fucking get by.
Yeah, democracy going really well over here in reality.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.